The Republican Party's Obamacare Repeal and Replacement Bill is back yet again for what is now probably the 100th time this year, I think. And this zombie of a bill is now being proposed by Bill Cassidy and Lindsey Graham. And this iteration of this draconian healthcare bill is not necessarily any different than the last version, but it's still scarier because what's different about this bill is that it actually might pass. So according to the LA Times, they report Cassidy Graham follows a recognizable conservative template. The ACA's Medicaid expansion and tax credits to purchase insurance from the private market would be eliminated and replaced with block grants given to states. When a Republican proposes a block grant, this almost always means a big spending cut, and Cassidy Graham is no exception. It would reduce federal healthcare spending by about $400 billion in less than a decade. And not only would it end the Medicaid expansion, it would entail savage cuts to Medicaid as a whole. In another retrograde move, the bill would effectively end the ACA's protection of people with pre-existing conditions, as states could choose to allow insurers to charge people with such conditions higher premiums. Millions of people would lose insurance, and many more would be effectively locked out of private markets as subsidies became less generous and states allowed insurers to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. As with the previous Republican proposals, the effect of Cassidy Graham would be increases in preventable death, suffering, and financial ruin. But we don't even know how many people will lose coverage because the Congressional Budget Office won't have time to properly score the bill before the September 30th deadline to pass it under reconciliation rules. We do know the number will be large. So think about how egregious and immoral this bill is. They want to cut healthcare spending by $400 billion. Meanwhile, they just overwhelmingly approved a $700 billion spending bill for the military. So if we're using our money to kill people in foreign countries, that's fine. We have the money for that. But when it comes to taking care of our own sick Americans, we don't have the money for that. We have to actually cut spending and allow states to discriminate against people with pre-existing conditions. I mean, this is so immoral. It's honestly unfathomable how anyone can support it, but there is support among Republicans, and what makes this bill a little bit more frightening is that the previous holdouts, like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowsky, they actually might be on board with it this time around. So Matt Fuller of HuffPost explains that Senate Republicans who once seemed resolutely opposed to even the most modest Obamacare repeal suddenly sounded less resolute Monday. The proposal is seemingly less repellent to Senator Lisa Murkowsky, one of the 3 Senate Republicans who voted against the skinny repeal in July, along with Susan Collins and John McCain. Murkowsky told the Huffington Post on Monday that she's undecided on Graham Cassidy, as the measure is known, and that she and her staff were still looking to see how Alaska would make out under the bill. Now, there's a couple reasons why Lisa Murkowsky and Susan Collins and John McCain might actually be on board with this particular bill. And first of all, they're selling this as a states' rights bill it's as states' rights as the last bill, so that doesn't necessarily make a difference. And also, there's a deadline, so they're really forced to choose quickly. But what makes this really interesting is that when she states there how she's looking at how this bill will affect Alaska, well, what other Republicans are trying to do is they're trying to tempt people like Lisa Murkowsky to get on board by offering pork in this bill, so particularized benefits that will only help out Alaska, and that's what is influencing her, so that way she can then go back to her constituents and brag about how, look, I got this done for Alaskans. This is what I did. So, they're actually being really sneaky, really clever, but there's another reason. Their donors are threatening to withhold funds from them if they don't actually back this bill. And when I say withhold funds, I mean withhold funds from the aggregate party, because the Koch brothers and their network, they're saying that if they don't get healthcare and tax reform passed, well, the Republican Party shouldn't expect donations from them come 2018 and 2020. So, this is despicable. This is absolutely despicable for the Republicans who actually had a conscience, presumably, like Lisa Murkowsky. Now they're trying to tempt her to get on board with this draconian so-called healthcare bill by offering pork for her. And, she's also being strong-armed by the party's donors, because clearly Republicans, if they withhold money and cite healthcare reform and their inability to pass it as a reason, then certainly the party will come down on Lisa Murkowsky and Susan Collins and John McCain pretty hard. So they're really, they're pulling out all the stops to get this bill passed. And it's so sickening. This really shows the extent to which the modern Republican Party is the party of death. They approve new military spending bills that are larger than they've been in a really long time. But when it comes to healthcare, they want to cut healthcare. They want to make sure that more people end up dying. Now, they're not telling you that this is their intentions. They're not unequivocally saying we want people to die, but that's what will happen if they vote for this bill. And by pushing for this bill, they are pushing for Americans to die due to a lack of healthcare. Because when you cut off healthcare access and you make it more difficult for Americans to get healthcare, well, as a result of that, as a direct result of that, people die. So the Republican Party is the party of death and destruction. They push for bills that destroy the world and cut healthcare of their own citizens. I mean, what a despicable, immoral joke of a political party.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.